Fast food feels like the ultimate symbol of modern industrial capitalism. Assembly lines, standardization, corporate efficiency. So why did ancient Athens and ancient Rome already have it? Cities packed with people who had no kitchens, no time, and no interest in cooking, and merchants who figured out how to feed them fast. The tools were different. The problem and the solution were almost identical. Let's find out why. Picture two people who will never meet. One lives in a crowded apartment building in Rome in the 1st century. The other lives in a suburb outside Los Angeles, 1948. Neither one has time to cook tonight. Neither one has a kitchen they can actually use. And neither one knows the person who's about to make their food. This is the problem hiding underneath fast food, and it has almost nothing to do with hunger. The real question is this: how do you feed large numbers of strangers, quickly, cheaply, and reliably, when most of them have no time, no kitchen, and no relationship with whoever is cooking for them? That problem only shows up under specific conditions. Crowded cities, workers with no time to spare, homes without functioning kitchens, and food changing hands between people who have never met and may never meet again. Rome had all 4 conditions. So did mid-century America. And solving this problem is harder than it sounds, because speed, cost, and consistency pull against each other. A cook working alone can be careful, but not fast. A rushed cook can be fast, but not reliable. Every fast food system in history has had to find a way around that tension. Walk through the streets of ancient Pompeii, and you'd run into something strange. Built into the front wall of ordinary buildings were L-shaped counters, with large ceramic jars sunk right into the stone. These were called Thermopolia, and they were, for all practical purposes, fast food counters. Archaeologists have identified more than 150 of them in Pompeii alone. The jars, known as dolia, held food that was already prepared. Stews, legumes, sometimes wine. A customer didn't order something custom-made. They walked up, pointed, paid, and ate. There was no waiting for a meal to be cooked from scratch, because the cooking had already happened before the customer ever showed up. This was the first move. Separate the cooking from the serving. Prepare food in batches, ahead of demand, so that speed at the counter doesn't depend on speed in the kitchen. The second move was cutting down choice. Thermopolia didn't offer sprawling menus. They offered a small, repeatable set of dishes. Fewer options meant faster decisions for the customer and simpler, more consistent preparation for the seller. That's not a modern efficiency trick. It shows up 2,000 years earlier, built directly into the architecture. Then there's the third move, and it's easy to miss because it doesn't look like a business decision. The food was visible. It sat in jars embedded right into the counter, in plain sight, at a fixed price. A stranger walking up didn't need to know the cook personally, or trust their reputation, or negotiate. They could just look at what was being sold and decide. Visibility did the work that trust normally requires. None of this was accidental. Historians studying Pompeii and Herculaneum, including work by archaeologist Andrew Wallace Hadrill, point to a structural reason behind all of it. Roman apartment buildings, called insulae, were multi-story, densely packed, and built largely from wood. Open cooking fires inside them were a serious fire risk and were often restricted, which meant a huge share of the urban population didn't have the option of cooking at home. Eating out wasn't a lifestyle choice. It was closer to a requirement. So Thermopolia weren't scattered randomly either. They clustered near intersections, forums, and public baths, the exact places where foot traffic and time pressure already existed. The Romans weren't trying to create demand. They were positioning themselves inside demand that already existed. No refrigeration, no standardized training, no corporate anything. And still, the Romans had already landed on batching, menu limitation, visible pricing, and strategic placement as the answer to feeding strangers fast. In 1948, in San Bernardino, California, 2 brothers made a decision that had nothing to do with inventing a new food. Richard and Maurice McDonald already ran a successful drive-in restaurant, complete with car hops and a menu of about 25 items. Then they shut it down and reopened it completely redesigned. They cut the menu from around 25 items down to 9. They got rid of the car hops, and they rebuilt the kitchen itself, organizing it the way a factory assembly line was organized, with each worker performing one narrow task, over and over, instead of one cook handling an entire order start to finish. They called it the Speedee service system. This is worth slowing down on, because the obvious assumption is that McDonald's succeeded because of the hamburger. It didn't. The hamburger wasn't new. What was new was the system built around making it. Inside that system, tasks were broken apart. One person handled the grill. Another handled assembly. Another handled fries. Another handled drinks. No single worker needed to be a skilled cook capable of managing an entire meal. They needed to be reliably good at one repeated motion. This is specialization applied to a kitchen, and it let the restaurant produce food faster and more predictably than a traditional short-order setup ever could. Then came the second major shift, and it's the one that separates McDonald's most sharply from anything Rome achieved. In 1954, Ray Kroc, a milkshake mixer salesman, encountered the McDonald Brothers restaurant and saw something bigger than a single successful location. He partnered with them to begin franchising the system starting in 1955. This history is well documented in accounts like John F. Love's book, McDonald's, Behind the Arches. Franchising meant the system itself, not just the restaurant, could be copied. The same limited menu, the same kitchen layout, the same specialized roles, the same procedures, all of it written down, standardized, and handed to new operators in new locations who could replicate the experience without having invented any of it themselves. That solved the stranger trust problem in a way Rome physically couldn't. A Roman customer could trust a Thermopolia because the food was visible and the seller was local. A McDonald's customer, thousands of miles from where the system began, could trust it because the burger in front of them was engineered to taste and look the same as the one served anywhere else in the country. Trust wasn't built through familiarity anymore. It was built through standardization at scale. Location mattered here too, just as it had in Rome, except now it followed highways and growing suburbs instead of forums and bathhouses. McDonald's went where time-pressured customers already were, on their way somewhere else, with a car and very little patience to spare. So McDonald's didn't just make food faster. It industrialized consistency itself, and then made that consistency portable, something Rome, without corporate structures or written operating systems, had no way to achieve. Strip away the ceramic jars and the golden arches, and both systems were solving the exact same equation. Reduce menu choice, so decisions happen faster. Prepare food ahead of the customer's arrival, so serving speed doesn't depend on cooking speed. Make the product visible or predictable, so a stranger doesn't need a personal relationship to trust it. And place the business exactly where time pressure already exists, instead of hoping to create demand somewhere convenient. Menu limitation shows up in both. Roman Thermopolia offered a small, fixed set of prepared dishes. McDonald's cut its own menu down to 9 items. In both cases, fewer choices meant faster transactions on both sides of the counter. Batching shows up in both. Roman Dolia held food that was cooked well before any customer arrived. McDonald's kitchen was organized so that grilling, assembly, and packaging happened continuously, not on a per-order basis. Both systems separated the timing of cooking from the timing of serving. Visibility and standardization show up in both, though they solve trust in different ways. In Rome, the food sat in plain sight, at a fixed price, so a stranger could evaluate it instantly without needing to know the seller. At McDonald's, the food was standardized to taste and look identical from one location to another, so a stranger could trust it based on the brand itself, without ever meeting the specific person cooking it. And location logic shows up in both. Thermopolia clustered near intersections, forums, and bathhouses. McDonald's clustered near highways and growing suburbs. Different geography, same underlying strategy. Go where the time-pressured customers already are. None of this is a coincidence dressed up to look meaningful. It's what happens when two completely disconnected civilizations run into the same constraints, speed, cost, and the challenge of trusting a stranger, and independently discover the same narrow set of workable answers. There's no shared history between Pompeii and San Bernardino. No document passed down, no tradition carried forward. Just the same problem, quietly pointing toward the same shape of solution. But the systems aren't identical, and forcing them to match perfectly would misrepresent what actually happened. The differences matter just as much as the similarities. Rome achieved repetition. San Bernardino achieved replication, and those are not the same thing. Pompeii had many independent Thermopolia, each run by its own owner, each a local solution to a local version of the same problem. McDonald's achieved something structurally different starting in 1955, a single system copied deliberately and precisely across locations that had never previously existed as restaurants at all. That required something Rome never had, a legal and organizational framework, franchising, that let a business model itself become a transferable product. Labor was organized differently too. A thermopolium was typically run by a single owner or a family, handling the full range of tasks themselves. McDonald's introduced task specialization inside a single kitchen, breaking one job into several narrow, repeated roles. That's not a difference in effort. It's a difference in organizational technology, one Rome had no equivalent for. And the process itself traveled differently. McDonald's could write its methods down, standardize them into training and operating procedures, and hand them to someone who had never run a restaurant before. Roman methods spread through proximity and imitation, business owners watching what worked nearby and copying it, not through anything resembling a manual. None of this makes Rome's solution less impressive. It means Rome solved the problem using the tools available to it. No refrigeration, no motorized transport, no corporate law. McDonald's didn't outthink Pompeii. It had access to tools, mass food processing, transportation, legal structures for franchising that simply didn't exist yet in the ancient world. Which brings up the more interesting question. Why does this exact shape, limited choice, advanced preparation, visibility, and smart placement keep reappearing whenever this particular problem shows up, regardless of era or technology? It isn't unique to food, either. Standardized currency solved a version of the stranger trust problem for money. Guild marks did something similar for craftsmanship, letting a buyer trust a product's quality without knowing the maker personally. The pattern isn't about restaurants. It's about what happens anytime speed, cost, and trust between strangers all need to be solved at once. That points to something worth sitting with. Solutions like this aren't really invented from nothing. They're closer to discovered, because the constraints of the problem itself narrowed down the range of answers that can actually work. When unrelated civilizations, separated by 2,000 years and zero shared history, land on the same structural answer, that's a signal. It suggests the solution wasn't one culture's clever idea. It was closer to the shape the problem was always going to force onto anyone who tried to solve it seriously. So here's what I'm curious about. What's a problem you've noticed keeps getting solved the same way, in totally different places, industries, or eras? Drop it in the comments. I want to see what patterns you've spotted.